Welcome back. You're watching live from Paris on France 24. Now, that contact group meeting in Libya we've been talking about this morning, contact group meeting, on Libya in Rome is the subject of today's top story. And for more on that, I'm joined by our international affairs editor, Douglas Herbert, here in the studio with us. Now, Doug, the NATO air campaign is 7 weeks old now. There's a sense that things on the ground might be grinding into a stalemate. Would you say that this is crunch time for the rebels and the coalition?
Both sides. I mean, you said this is a 7-week-old campaign. I mean, there are people who are watching us this morning, probably 7 weeks. It feels like 7 months or 7 years. This thing already has the feeling of a long, drawn-out campaign. It has the makings of something that could just go on and on and on. And you'll remember those early stages of the campaign, and there was this sense of vim and vigor in the coalition, at least among the leading members of it, Britain, France, and the U.S. at the time, which was playing a very big role then. Clearing the airspace so that they could open up that no-fly zone. This was sort of the if you want to call it the easy part of the mission, you know, sending those planes in, striking at Colonel Gaddafi's air defenses, wiping them out. What's happened, though, since then, the story sort of has written itself. We've seen this campaign moving into much more sort of tactical phases where Gaddafi's forces have been digging in their heels in towns, especially the town of Misrata, which has become the scene of a giant humanitarian disaster, not in the making, but just disaster full stop. And in other sort of strongholds where the rebel forces have been trying to hold their own. They do have most of eastern Libya under their control, but there are still these sort of outposts which they are unable to get control of. And you have this back and forth, and what we've been seeing as a result of this is NATO sort of getting together, huddling together, getting a little more desperate not to turn this into a long campaign and changing their strategy. We've seen that in recent days with the shift, the focus now on what they call command and control structures, striking at military complexes, the airstrikes we saw last Saturday in which Gaddafi's youngest son and 3 grandchildren were killed, hitting command structures, hitting any place where they think might be crucial to the loyalist forces waging their campaign, whether it is helping them in their supply lines, helping in their communications, helping in their telecommunications. The television center also targets of strikes. But even that is only a strategy which could probably last so long and be effective for so long. They're hoping that it will work quickly. But what if it doesn't, and what if it continues to be drawn out? We've already had 10,000 people killed in this conflict, and this is already a pretty fragile coalition.
The military campaign, of course, only part of the story as well. A hot topic on the table today revolves around the finances of the Transitional National Council. What are we expecting to come out of that?
Well, this is money, money, money. This is what this meeting is today about. Because the money, money, money aspect, if the rebels get their cash, the thought is they could become a politically legitimate, a politically viable force. The truth is, right now on the ground, eastern Libya, which is their bastion, the rebel bastion right now, and centered in, obviously, Benghazi, they're running out of cash. Running out of cash for basic medical supplies, food, gas, paying for gasoline and petrol, all of that, electricity, hospitals, all the things you need to keep even a makeshift economy running, up and running. Now, the rebels have put a price tag on what they need at about $3 billion. International community, NATO, Western donors, they think that that is a high figure. They are looking probably at something more in the range of about $1 billion. The idea right now, tentatively, being to set up a sort of trust fund, a trust fund that would be under the control of the international community, be a way for the rebels to get money. They were thinking at one point of actually unfreezing, letting them have some of the assets that have been frozen, tied to Gaddafi. Let them have that money. That's legally very complicated. Instead, they're thinking of perhaps letting them borrow against those funds on the assumption that when and if Gaddafi does go, those funds will be unfrozen, they'll be untied up, and they'll be able to pay that will be the rebels' money. They'll be able to reimburse it. Finally, Qatar has been a point player in the oil angle, getting that
ways to unlock oil in the rebel-held east.
Giant question, because the oil's all there, and you know, in normal times they'd be pumping about 1.6 million barrels a day, selling it off. They've already Qatar's has created a mechanism to sell about 1 million barrels, but that's nowhere near what they'd really need to be doing every day to be very viable. But they're very much going to be looking at ways to allow the rebels to get some of that oil on lands under their control to market to sell it, so that they would be able to use the revenues from that as well to help fund their campaign.
Now in Rome today we have the foreign ministers from France, the UK, Italy, Qatar. Hillary Clinton is of course there as well. Let's zoom in a bit on this coalition, a coalition of the unwilling in many ways. There's a couple of NATO members playing very minor roles and a couple of committed allies who seem to be providing all the muscle here.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because when you think of this, you know, everyone is on board at this contact meeting. Everyone is sort of represented. You have a lot of international organizations represented there, the Islamic Conference, even the World Bank. I think the IMF might even have a representative there. The African Union is an observer there. You have the Arab League, obviously, there, along with the NATO and European members that are leading this coalition, and the U.S., of course. But the question is, it's one thing to draw up this nice little list of the contact group. Then you have to really read between the lines and who's really a player on that list, who isn't, how strong is this coalition, and what would it take for it to snap apart and just unravel? And not that much. In the early days, remember what it was. It was France, seconded by Britain, basically leading this and really launching those first strikes. U.S. was a big player at the time. This is before the U.S. The U.S. never wanted to play the major role. They saw this as a European-led campaign, a campaign that should be in Europe's part of the world. It should be leading. Europe should be leading it. U.S. has subsequently taken a step back, handed over control to NATO. NATO, the 28 members of NATO, of course, of which the U.S. is still a prominent member. But it's been shifting now. You've had Italy, which had been a reluctant, very reluctant player at first, stepping up in recent weeks into this coalition, offering its bases, offering its planes for airstrikes, but still not being perceived as gung-ho as Britain and France. The U.S., meanwhile, yes, it's taken a step back, but even as it's done so, it's brought some more very heavy equipment into the campaign, namely the Predator drones. Those are the drones that allow them to monitor, take intelligence, and then strike. No one really else has equipment like that. But you have the reluctant as ever as well. You have Germany, major, biggest European, economy and everything. Germany is still very much adverse against this campaign. You have the non-NATO members, Security Council members as well. You have Russia, you have China, very much opposed to many aspects of this campaign, have a lot of questions about it. The recent airstrikes I was telling you, the ones last Saturday that knocked out Gaddafi's compound and apparently killed his son and some other relatives, Russia has serious doubts as to whether or not that raises questions whether the goal was not, in fact, to assassinate Colonel Gaddafi, contrary to what a lot of the Western leaders say. A lot of people sitting on the fence, and among the Arabs, I'll just quickly mention, you have Qatar, obviously, out there. You have Morocco and Jordan contributing to this coalition, UAE, United Arab Emirates to a lesser extent as well, but you have a broad coalition of the unwilling as well.
Just very briefly, Doug, you mentioned there about the objective of assassinating Gaddafi or not. In fact, French Foreign Minister Alain Juppé, speaking to France 24 yesterday, said that is indeed not the goal of this campaign. Diplomatic talk, or can we take him at his word?
Well, you could take him at his word as a diplomat. What he basically, yes, that's exactly what he said. He said that the objective of this campaign is not to kill Gaddafi. And this is, a lot of people actually believe that the Western alliance, that NATO and Europe, that they are, in fact, despite no matter what they say, their ultimate goal is to kill Gaddafi. What they have been saying, you have to read the fine print here, is technically they want to deprive Gaddafi of the means to harm civilians. And they think that anything that would do that, that would impede him towards that end is a legitimate target in this campaign. That said, if Gaddafi were to be knocked out in one of these strikes, and it was a strike on what is considered a legitimate target, you probably wouldn't hear that many excuses from the coalition.
Many thanks, Douglas Herbert, our International Affairs Editor. Very insightful and interesting as ever. And of course, we can follow you. Regular updates on your Twitter feed. The address is, you are...
It should be up there on the screens right now.
You
there you
are
go. At
Doug
F24.
Many thanks for that, Douglas Herbert. That's it for Top Story, and indeed the end of this half an hour of Live from Paris. Stay tuned for Stuart Norval coming up with the headlines in just a couple of moments.